back to another edition of the Cover One podcast. As always, I'm Kevin Massare here with the infamous Erik Turner. How you doing today, Erik?
Good, Kev, man. Thanks for doing this. And, a few days to the draft, man. I'm ready to go.
Absolutely. And as always, we'd like to shout out to our Sabres podcast, Beyond the Blade. The guys over there do a wonderful job. And absolutely, after you listen to us, tune into their show and get some info from them on the Sabres, as there's big stuff coming out over there as we speak. So going into getting into this, man, everyone's interested in this draft and wants to know what's going on. And they're tuning into us for Bills news. One of the first stories that broke today was Jabrill Peppers diluted his drug test at the combine. Interesting tidbit to me. I would think that teams already knew this, and if they didn't, I don't know why they wouldn't have already had this record. But Adam Schefter did get a hold of it and did tweet this information out for the public, as well as a statement from Peppers' agent himself, basically saying another one of these. He was sick. He was drinking tons of water. Took the test and boom, it's a one-shot deal, and he failed it for dilution. So, what do you think about this, Erik?
When I look at it now, and I think you're right. I think teams knew this. I find it kind of odd that it's just being released.
Yeah.
This close to the draft. So that, first of all, is kind of surprising, but I don't think it'll hurt him as much as most people think.
No.
The teams will, already know they're bored for the most part. Will it, maybe cause him to drop a couple spots? Yeah. I know personally I had him with a late first, second round grade. I do think he will, probably be drafted in the late first, but I don't think this is too big a deal. And if I remember correctly, when he was at the combine, he did participate in both positions at linebacker and safety. And I do remember them mentioning that, or I don't know if it was him when they interviewed him real quick before he worked out. He had mentioned something about being a little dehydrated. Maybe that's just my bad memory, but I think that did actually occur. But overall, I mean, I personally am not one that likes him, for the Bills, especially in the first round, even if they stay, at pick 10. But I don't think overall it's that big a deal. Just as much as I feel the same way about, Reuben Foster, I don't think, his off the field issues totally, turn teams off from his talent. So,
Yeah.
And that's what wins in this league, right? Talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a couple off of Peppers there. I'm actually a fan of him. I think people get a little caught up on where he's going to play or scheme fits. I think it's the day and age where, everyone's an edge player. So it's a day and age of where we're really struggling to find fits for these guys. There's different schemes out there. And, if we get a little bit confused on where he might play, we just immediately dock him down the board as far as possible. I mean,
Right.
It just comes back to us wanting to have skilled football players. And I really think between his special teams ability and his ability to, really do everything well, I can get over the fact that he might not be, an outside linebacker. I mean, I really think he brings safety position. He can run some weird offensive schemes if he needs to. He can kick return, punt return, play special teams. He brings a gamut of stuff. Is that worth 10th overall? No.
Right.
I like him a lot, but I think he immediately becomes a consideration if we get down into the 20s. For some reason, we trade back a while and take another second and maybe another fourth or something.
Right.
I think he immediately becomes a consideration. I think we love that versatility. He's actually, a lot of people say he's like Brian Scott, like our old, linebacker safety guy. Brian Scott was a little bit before his time, but
well before his time, definitely. Yeah. He kind of carved out that role.
He would be further along in his career if he had that career now. And then If you look at like Jack Thompson, like if you can say one thing, Sean McDermott doesn't say much, but he always alludes to this guy. Like anytime he has a chance, he alludes to this draft pick, how well he thinks he plays, how hybrid he thinks he is, how versatile he thinks he is. And I think, you could kind of get a few of those similar qualities in Jabrill. And then his other comparison is, Micah Hyde on our team. So
right.
If you're getting another similar player and you have them both on the field at the same time, you can do different things versatility-wise. So I am actually a fan of him. I mean, I don't see the hate. I don't necessarily think he should be a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
But I think as you hit into the 20s, there's just a no-brainer if you think that he's, as versatile as I do. I don't think there's a no-brainer that if he's there at 20, 21, 22, as you get to the playoff teams, that's like you don't have to have like a direct scheme fit at that point. You're just adding good football players. And I wish we could do the same. So
yeah,
I'll take him in the second all day.
Right. No, a second round grade, like I said, I have on him. And, if the Bills were to go in an offensive direction early in the draft and look at
Yep.
him, or if Buda Baker slides, those type of players, like you said, in the late 20s, those playoff teams that have, that it's going to be tough for players to just come in and start it right away, but you can find packages or
Yep.
find a role for him. Then I'm all for it. I do think the role that Peppers would play is already occupied by Micah Hyde. If you have an odd front team that, uses a lot of hybrid safety work, guys that come into the box and just, can have him freelance,
Right.
then yeah, absolutely. It's definitely worth it at the, end of the first round. But I just think for our sake, I don't think he's a guy that I would, waste an early first round pick
Yeah.
on,
It's
go ahead.
it's interesting. No, it's an interesting debate, and like what really should be said about Sean McDermott's scheme specifically is we know he plays two linebackers more often than not,
Right.
and I think he's pretty much leading the trend, and a lot of teams are going this way to where they're having at least 5 defensive backs on the field on a specific play. So I don't think that I think that you can do different things with him other than I think you can have him and Hyde on the field at the same time. How that would look, I don't know. That would be up to McDermott to kind of tell me. I'm not a defensive coach per se.
Right.
But I think he's very skilled, and you add in that dynamic of he's just a good football player, and you add in his special teams ability too. I think you get a little bit out of him there. But yeah, once again, I mean, I love him, and I even have a late first grade on him. So I don't
Right.
I don't necessarily think he's a greatest at 10. I think we need to come out with a rock solid gem there. And back to Foster, who had a similar type of thing happen to him. He has a
Hmm.
few more off the field concerns.
Yeah, he does.
So I think that affects it more than just one diluted failed drug test that, a lot of people say that's probably marijuana or drugs or, something, but I'm not so sure that they don't. I mean, I've known people that have done that, just and have no recollection of doing any type of drug that do, drink like that when they're sick
Hmm.
and they try to drown it out. So
Right.
interesting timing right around the combine. There has been a lot of people thoughts that like when you're getting drug test, you're going to the combine. So like if you weren't to do drugs or like you did recreational things, like that wouldn't be the time you did them. So plus he does have also has a clean track record, and I think like at most he'll sit in like a class for a couple sessions. So I don't think it'll
Right.
affect him. Foster to me it's a bigger challenge. I like the player, but once again back into McDermott and Whaley will take a risk on guys like this. McDermott, it doesn't seem like his first draft ever he'd want to spend the 10th overall pick to bring him in with the question marks. I think he's got to knock it out of the park. I mean, I don't.
No, you're right, man. You're definitely right. And kind of going back and forth between the Foster thing and the Peppers thing. I mean, yeah, Foster's had off the field issues, and there are, not his mental state, not just off the field, but his mental state on the field. Of course, he's very instinctual. He can shoot the gaps. He makes football players. He's a great football player, much like Peppers. But if you're drafting a guy that high, you want him to be the centerpiece of your defense. And if he has those off the field issues
Right.
and has some IQ issues on the field, diagnosing different coverages when motion happens, stuff like that, which I don't think are as big a deal as his off the field issues.
Right.
But all of that in totality,
Exactly.
using that pick on at number 10 for a guy like that, it is a tough way for a new head coach to start his regime. So I do agree with you on that.
And back to back, like I know, go to last year, we took someone with borderline medical concerns in Shaq Lawson and either got it wrong or didn't care, or we don't really know exactly how that shaped up on the Shaq Lawson end. And then, you just had your second round pick who looked great go out there and tear his ACL. So, I
Right.
mean, it's a bummer, but I think they need to bring in a guy day one that's like super healthy and jumping around and doing everything he can in, the Bills videos and, that's just what they need publicity wise as well as on the field. So,
Right.
I mean, that's why, I'm against any type of quarterback talk at 10. And that's not necessarily even because I don't know that there's a guy there. I mean, I think Mitch Trubisky's there to be picked. I think that value is okay. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly don't think that's terrible value for what he could be. You need to spend a little bit extra value to get those kind of guys. But I think he cannot go in there with a quarterback competition and add any publicity, negative publicity to the team right now. That's what the PR guys are in there saying, hey, I don't really care what you do. They're telling Whaley and McDermott, like, but please come out of this making us look good. Like, that is exactly what we need right now. We cannot have, like, huge quarterback competition. If you take a guy in the third round, fine. We can spin that. If Mahomes is there, or you like Peterman, or something happens and you need to take one in the third, there's no issues there. Or you could even get involved in the second if you had to. But at 10, you just really you don't have any say. You got to play that guy within the first 8 weeks.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on the organization, that's for sure. And I don't think that just from looking over the quarterbacks, I don't think they're any of them are worthy of a top 10 pick. And I think that's why they kind of floated out those, they're looking over every single guy and traveling here or there to look at,
I think they're doing that for the second round, personally, second and third round. I don't think they're doing that because they think they're taking him at 10. They're getting a day one starter at 10. They're doing that because they might want a guy and they might want to take him at between 44 and 75.
If they're the value of said quarterback, matches their second round grade, then they're taking best player available. So when those roads meet, there is a possibility, that any one of these quarterbacks could slide in. I mean, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of scouts, ranking some of these guys, outside of the first round. So, so when those roads, cross, then I think that's something that they've done their due diligence on.
Yep.
And
they're ready to do it at that point.
Exactly. At 10, I think it's without question. I don't think that's a total.
I don't even think it's
shot in the dark.
Either. Like you have your owner flying around. I kind of look at it differently. Like it's not smokescreen. The guy wants to be in front of quarterbacks. He wants to see who the guys are before making a decision. I don't think it's, once again, we said it, I don't think it's for 10. I think if they're there at 44 and Kaiser's their guy and it matches up, I think they do it in a heartbeat. They draft the guy, they put him on the field. You have a depth player now. You have a guy that can come in with injury. I don't know. We don't really know what they think of Cardale Jones. It's who knows if he ever even sniffs the field again.
Or if they believe he fits the system. Exactly. I mean, that too.
I think it's really him versus Yates for a position, to be honest. And then I think that they could draft the guy here that is their real developmental guy and, see what happens with Jones. I mean, it doesn't hurt to bring them all to camp and see what happens. So if Kaiser lines up with that second round value, or it could be Mahomes, or we don't know who their guy is, but I've skewed my values a little bit on quarterback on purpose because I do see a lot of people. It's trendy to give them second round grades. And, I have a couple of late first and a couple of first round grades on guys, but that's just because I think that you have to account for value of what teams will place on them, not just your own scouting. Like I don't get to meet these guys. I don't get to shake their hands. I don't get to see their injury history, do interviews. So I can't skew anything other than what a team will do because I'm not a personal general manager. So I'm going to skew my quarterback rankings high because I think it's smart. And a lot of people have said, though, that 6 quarterbacks could go in the top 60 picks. So,
I mean, it's the number one position. I mean, it's definitely, you're right to weigh it that way and build your board that way, regardless of, what an actual grade you evaluated them on. So it's a primo position. I mean, so you got to weigh it a little different and totally understand that. So, I mean, you had Trubisky ahead of Watson and Kaiser and Mahomes. So, I mean, you could talk to anyone, any scout, any fan that's watched these guys, that's, done research on these guys. And I'll tell you what, I bet you every single person has a different ranking on these guys.
Yeah, no, they do. And to me, in my rankings, so you'll see, Kaiser at a 3.17 and a Mahomes at a 3.5. That's borderline within a player of each other. So they're very similar to me. They're both easily the third guy. I like Kaiser a little more. I just can't get by how bad of a year he had last year. It hurt his grade a little bit for me. I know he lost weapons. I know things happened there, and he could be the most. I know a lot of guys on our staff think he's probably the guy, and I like him. And he still technically has a late first round grade here on my board. So I like him. I really do think he goes in the early second personally, but if someone really likes him, that's where my grades will kick in and say, I bet you someone trades back in Teddy Bridgewater style, and takes him in the end of the first.
Yep.
So,
definitely. And I'm a big Kaiser fan. I mean, I'm a little bit of a homer because I'm an Irish fan, but it's easier for me to separate, last season versus the season before, just because I have seen all his games. And I do believe that, his play translates into the NFL. He's got it all when it comes to that. I do take into account also, again, it's a little different for me because I'm an Irish fan, but Brian Kelly and the way he treats his quarterbacks and what he asks of them and how much pressure he puts on them. And so, I mean, it's a little different for me. And like I said, you ask any other person, you're going to have probably a different ranking at either way. So, that was a really good board there. You get good rankings there. at the QB position.
Yeah,
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah,
I want to talk about Gillislee, man. I mean, it looks like it's about 5 minutes from when we're supposed to find out what the deal with him is, man. Where are you on that? I mean, are you resigning? Are you matching? What are you doing?
Okay, so at this point, knowing what I know, like we'll start at the top and then we can go from there. Like
Right.
for me with Gillislee, it's pretty simple. Like you didn't have a grade on him that was worthy of a $2.7 million guaranteed contract.
Mm-hmm.
That alone, at that value with LaShawn McCoy, puts us at like the top still. I think it would be second to Pittsburgh just because of their crazy deal that Bell has. But it would put us right at the top. It would put us in a position to where we're guaranteed having to take him. We guarantee have to pay him more than that if we want to redo a deal. It puts you in a bind to where you're setting the market for this guy at 2.7 minimum because that's what you placed on it.
Right.
So only two running backs were placed at this tender. One was Isaiah Crowell, which is an obvious starter in Cleveland. The other was Thompson in Washington, who's probably going to be their starter, but in at least a battle there. So I don't think you can just set his number right there at a backup running back spot. Now, where it becomes interesting is, do you value him as a starter? So in a run-first team, here's where it gets tricky for me. If McCoy goes down, this guy immediately comes in and it's probably better than what do we want to call it? 10 starters currently in the NFL? Like where would you place him just on his own? 20th overall?
I'd say that's a good spot for him. The thing with him that, differentiates him from the other backup running backs is, and it's a trait that not many running backs have is, whether he's getting 10 touches or 20 touches, he's always at, that high level of play.
Right.
He doesn't need a ton of touches to get in rhythm to run. He's a guy that you give him, just a touch and that touch could be a difference making play. So I do understand when, a lot of people are like, it should be a no brainer because having played running back, I do think he's good. Now, do I think long-term he can be a starter? I don't know about that. I really don't. Because I think of, I also factor in, it's a passing league and all that good stuff. And I do think that the Bills need to start thinking about that with McCoy getting up there in age. And because of that contract, I think they need to redistribute that money. And so do I think he's a long-term starter? I can't say that for sure because, honestly, he hasn't proven it. So
yeah, and as we were speaking, it just came down. We did not opt to take his contract on. So the Bills will receive a 5th-round pick in compensation for him. And I think it makes sense. Isn't necessarily what I would have done originally. I don't know. I don't know. Like, it was clear as day when you could have set a $2.79 million. At least I can say for once, the Bills were consistent on this decision to where saying that you don't want to put a $2.79 million valuation on guaranteed and then going to give him $4 million just is so inconsistent. Like, it would have been an inconsistent move to be like, well, I didn't initially think he was that. Now the Patriots do, like, I'm going to as well. So at least they stayed consistent. And then, on a PR's perspective, they can say, no, we valued him at $2 million. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that was, and that's the way, I mean, not just the Bills, but most NFL franchises, most front office personnel, the benefit of the doubt because they know 10 times more than we do as fans, sitting at home on the couch. So, yeah, I do think they placed the value on Gillislee with the 5th-round tender. And, a certain value comes with that, certain monetary value comes with that. And they're like, well, hey, guess what? And it's a running back position. Yes, we're a run-happy team. But, again, you can find running backs, whether it be in the 5th round or undrafted.
What a year to do it. Like, sometimes I'm like, this draft sucks. Like, for running backs, I could, be a 7th-round pick in this draft personally because it's just not good. But if you pull up, even on our boards, like, we can get into that in a little bit. But to wrap up Gillislee, we're getting pick 163 for him. 1.8 comes off the salary cap now. Yet from a PR's perspective, whether you like it or not and think he should have gotten a 2nd-round tender, at least now you are consistent in saying we value him at 1.8, not $1 more. Like, we saved the extra of, $6.2 million and we get the pick. It was a no-brainer. They can say that, and we just made the Patriots wait 5 days for no reason. I mean, it's a simple PR statement. Whereas if you go and take him at 3:59 p.m. and say, yeah, we want him, you look like you're just doing it because the Patriots did. And you already made your valuation on the guy when you had the chance to tender him. It's not like it came out of thin air that you had to pick these values. At the time that you placed this tender, you knew he wasn't worth the extra $1 million. You knew you could bait someone into taking him at a 5th-round pick. No one's taking him at a second-round pick, so he's yours at 2.79. Plus, you only get him for a year. So you go through this next year without an extension or without this RFA. So you get a fifth-round pick for him. If he doesn't play again, it's a good move. Or if he's the third guy in New England, has a game or two, which we're all going to hear about now. But I do think it's less of an effect if he goes to the Rams. I do think it's not as big of a deal. I know a lot of people say they don't know if they believe that, but I do. I think if he goes to the Rams, if he goes to Jacksonville, I don't really think it matters. I think it's less talked about.
Right. And again, it's the running back position. And I'm the biggest supporter of Gillislee. He's an effective guy, but you also got to, factor in we have a decent offensive line when it comes to the run. There's a reason why we've been, tops in rushing the last few years. So, and then you look into the draft again, whether it's a guy that you're drafting mid-round, late in the draft, or even undrafted free agency, you can find zone runners. You can find zone runners outside of the draft, free agency, undrafted free agent, anywhere. I mean, It's not that hard, and you put them behind this offensive line, and they can be effective. And I've been touting Jonathan Williams a lot, lately, and it's not necessarily the zone scheme is not a scheme that he played a lot in at Arkansas, but I mean, the Bills drafted him in the 5th round last year. A lot of people had him, a day 2 grade last year, and even when they drafted him, we had Carlos and Gillislee. And people were ecstatic. They're like, man, this kid, future is bright if he stays healthy. Yeah. So I don't understand why all of a sudden no one.
He was a second round too, wasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it's nuts to think that, they don't believe in this guy when, they spent that pick on him last year. So I do think he'll get his opportunity. And I asked him, again, having played running back. I asked him, what he's so excited about in this offense. And it just, he said that it's the creativeness, because in his zone blocking scheme, it gives the control to the runner. He's reading the blocks in front of him. He doesn't have to, in a gap or man scheme, he has a specific entry point, right? He has to aim for and hit that hole. In a zone blocking scheme, the creativity is back in their game. That's why Shady and Williams, are going to excel in this scheme. And, then I further asked him, what kind of running backs do you like in this draft?
Right.
Because he had mentioned on Twitter about he's watching a lot of Arian Foster film. And that
did he give you exact players?
In this draft, yes, he did, and that's what I'm actually getting to. He loves Joe Mixon's running style. He's got that type of frame that he loves to see. Obviously, he can agree with, because he's a bigger running back himself, and he likes the versatility of Mixon. Another guy he had mentioned was Wayne Gallman from Clemson. He's another guy that no one's even talking about, honestly. Yeah. With all the weapons they had on the outside, and the Cadillac scheme that they have at Clemson, Gallman kind of goes unnoticed, but he's a guy that he can run multiple schemes. He can catch the ball in the backfield and break tackles, make guys miss in phone booths, and that's a a player to keep an eye on in this draft as far as running back goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a 4th round grade on Gallman. I mean, where do you see him?
Yeah, that's a fair grade. I think when it comes to the Bills themselves, I think then obviously if we don't make any moves, it's going to be a reach if they try to go after him. But if for some reason a guy like him slips into the 5th, or Connor is projected in that 5th round range, another guy that I know you like. I saw a lot of film on him when I was studying Peterman, and he's just another guy that they got him the ball. From under center, they got him the ball in the perimeter in the screen game. Matt Canada did a great job of using all the weapons on that offense, and James Conner is one of those.
Yeah, and now we just kind of own like the 5th round, so that'll be an interesting round for us to tune in on. After not having a 4th round pick, does open the door to a trade up in the 4th if we see a guy there and we're like, hey, we really want to come out with a certain running back or whatever it is. Does give us ability to come up cheaply to get the guy we're looking to. I personally really think Connor's a guy we could target as we get toward the draft time. And I don't know, have you gotten to look at Jeremy McNichols from Boise State at all, or is he kind of a guy you haven't seen much of?
No, I mean, I didn't study or grade him just because I was, kind of focusing on secondary linebackers.
Right. Yeah, why would you?
For us.
Yeah.
But I have seen film on him, and, when I watched him, I kind of got the same feeling that I got watching another Boise State running back,
right?
In Jay Ajayi. He kind of runs with that same type of physicality and that quick twitch, when he needs to make a move. Right? Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Especially going into this scheme. So I do think he's a fit, and he's a guy. I mean, there are a ton of highlights of him, again, catching it out of the backfield, catching it down the field. I think he's very underrated as far as this running back class goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's an underrated guy. He's one that I've wanted, even prior to us losing Gillislee. I thought he might even be worth taking a 5th-round pick on. Just, you never know what you're going to get there. We seem to do it every year anyways, like we did last year. And, another one that I got to personally watch in person throughout his career was from Toledo, Kareem Hunt, 5'10", 216, 3rd to 4th round.
Love him.
Another guy right in the range. I got to see him twice in person, and he's a baller. I think he's a good football player. I mean, in the 4th round, you're not going to get much better than him. And those are my two guys. I mean, those are the two guys I'm targeting right now between, the Boise State running back in McNichols and him. I mean, the only reason McNichols has even fallen a little bit is I know he has some type of injury.
Right.
I'm not quite sure, where he's at on that, but between him and Hunt, I mean, I really like it. And then as you mentioned, Wayne from Clemson, I mean, you can't really go wrong there with a couple of like really good options in the 5th round to kind of compete with Jonathan.
Right. And, I, as a guy that, loves running backs, Kareem Hunt, man, I love, obviously not just his size, but he would fit good in this scheme because of his balance. Right. he can take hits from multiple angles, still keep his shoulders square. And when you're in this zone blocking scheme, you want running backs, much like Gillislee, that always has their shoulders square and, has the balance. So once they make that one cut, that explosion through the hole, and, the ability to bounce off those tackles at the second level. So
Exactly.
his balance, along with Alvin Kamara, who is a perfect fit for this scheme, I think those two guys have some of the best balance in this draft altogether.
Do you think that, here's an interesting question we can talk about live that many people haven't been able to talk about yet. So we have a unique perspective to be able to record with the knowledge of now running back opening up as a potential draft pick. Mm-hmm. Do you think you could see something now in the 2nd or 3rd round where Kamara is, now immediately in the fold because of how good of a fit he is? I mean, do you think that now with everyone's going to be talking about the 5th and the 6th, so like that's shooting. Do you now think that opens the door to a 74th overall pick? Or yeah, I mean, I don't see it in the 2nd. I think would you see it in the 3rd?
For sure. I mean, at this point, first of all, it's the draft and it's the Bills. So anything shouldn't be of a surprise.
Sure.
But when you have this scheme in place, when you have this staff in place, they're thinking long term. A lot of people don't believe they are, but they're thinking long term. And again, when you take into account McCoy, how much we're paying him, his age, all of those factors. Running back,
Colbert's on a 1-year deal.
Yeah,
you don't know what you have in Jonathan Williams. You can't not draft someone because of Jonathan Williams yet. Maybe he'll prove that he's worth it. That you didn't need to spend a draft pick if he comes out and does his job. But I think at 74 now, absolutely opens the door. 75 absolutely opens the door for a running back. And Kamara, he's my perfect fit. I think he could go a little earlier than that, like end of the 2nd. But now you open the door to him, and you open the door to Mixon. Like, what are you thinking about these kind of guys outside of the top 3? Like, any one of these guys could be there in a 3rd round.
Right. And another person that I've been studying as far as running backs go, besides Kamara, is Dante Foreman, because I think when you take into account this scheme and what he brings as, a one-cut runner, but also with, he's got some bulk to him. He's very similar to Jonathan Williams, but I see Foreman as a straight downhill runner. He's not as physical as I want him to be, but if he goes to the 3rd round and the Bills take a flyer on him, I can't blame them, especially considering some of the research I've been doing, which I'm not going to totally disclose it, but I have something in the works as far as some different plays and things they're tweak and add to this offense under Rick Dennison to not just help Tyrod Taylor, but help get the ball in the hands of playmakers. And I think Foreman can be a tough guy to tackle. He lost a bunch of weight since the combine, and he ran really well. So he's a guy that can be a playmaker, even if it is for 10 touches, 12 touches, end of the game when with LaShawn McCoy's the defense is chasing him all over the field, and then you bring a guy like Foreman in. Good luck. So I think he's a guy, a mid-round guy that they should and probably will take a good look at.
Yeah, and we've gotten so this is funny because we've gotten to mention pretty much all of the second to fourth round guys in depth, and we like most of them. So
Right.
that is further proof to why you decline this deal and you go ahead and you take this fifth round pick. And the only challenge it does do to me is it does mean you need to use a pick on running back. I think you do need to come out of the
Right.
draft. I mean, at least a fifth round pick. I think you need to spend one on a running back. I think it's a shoe-in now. Especially with that extra pick, I'm pretty confident of it. But that's back to the original point. Without a fourth, does that open the door to a third round pick being a running back? And I absolutely think if there's a guy you like the most on the third round and you're on the clock, I think you take
Right.
him and think that that's going to be like, oh, we took a third round running back. So that might be one we need to all prepare ourselves for.
Absolutely. It's the Bills. I mean, you gotta expect to be surprised once the draft hits on Thursday. So again, it's a decent class of running backs here. There's some decent depth, and there are guys that can run obviously, several schemes, and they're proven guys. They're guys coming off injury, so there's going to be value. Again, much like Williams last year, and running backs all together every single draft year.
Yep.
You're going to find value.
And a funny note was that Gillislee was picked 164 by Miami. New England gives us 163 for him. So there you go. So
Nice.
you can go ahead and take a guy there. You should be able to. And how about this? Like, essentially, he became a free draft pick because we took him off the street when no one wanted him. So if it wasn't for us in the first place or our scouting department, we wouldn't have gotten his fifth round pick. He wouldn't have gotten the money. I think you can go all the way around to say I think it was a success. Can you argue whether he should have got slapped with a 2.7? Once again, you could if you really thought. But those will be the same people that will yell at you for spending, a cumulative $11 million on running back. So
Right.
I mean, you win and you lose. I mean, if you think he's that good and unstoppable, you would have put the 2.7 on him in the first place. But I mean, we don't know that Whaley's plan wasn't to bait someone into the fifth. I do think he missed on Hogan last year. I do think he probably would have liked to keep him, but not at that money. So that's where that one was easily like, let him go. That wasn't a bait move. Whereas Gillislee, I think that could have been like, oh, we'll take him at 1.8. We'll love him as a backup running back. I don't know if we can sign him long term. If someone takes him from us, we'll gladly take a fifth. And it just happened to be New England. So, of course, it just always seems to matter a little bit more. So
Sticks in our craw a little more, yeah.
Like, to me, if it was anyone else, it wouldn't have mattered as much. And the fifth round pick is great. I'll take it. It's a good deep class. I'm going to – at least they were consistent, and I can stick my hat into that saying that they didn't value him anywhere past $1.8 million, and here's proof of it. They took the fifth, and they took the money off the books. Opens the door for another $2 million vet, too. That's another avenue we can discuss. There's still some guys. I know AP's reported to go sign with the Saints, but there are some guys that are like, do we take a shot on Blunt now? I mean, now he's a street free agent bringing in that big back bruising 18 touchdowns last year. So the guy that we just go 1-for-1, give him the $2 million and have him play. I mean, that's not out of the question to now look at the vet route, D'Angelo Williams. I mean, these guys are older. Mind you, Jamal Charles, what do you do with some of these guys that are still there? Do you entertain the vet route or just 100% draft someone in the third to fifth?
No. I think, first of all, keep all options open.
Right.
I think that is the right thing to do. Unlike you, I wouldn't guarantee that we're taking a running back in this draft.
Okay.
But again, it wouldn't surprise me if they did. But, given the history of not just Dennison's scheme, but over the course of him being with Kubiak in the Shanahan scheme, I mean, they've had plenty of running backs come in there, whether it be, as free agents, undrafted free agents, and be productive. And again, we got to think for 2017, it's not that big of a deal. It's not a priority in my book because you have, McCoy taking most of the carries. But
Charles or Blunt or D'Angelo Williams, those are really the three left. Do any of those three ring your bell? Let's say we go your route and we don't take a running back in the draft. I mean, I immediately think you can consider a vet guy now. So if you look at the top remaining, and at least in my rankings, I have those three. Do any of them stick out for, better fits than others? I mean, then you have guys like Chris Johnson and Denard Robinson and Kaiir Robinson. So there's some middle tier guys there too, but I don't think we need to go that route. Do you see them, getting an immediate number two in Blunt or Charles or D'Angelo Williams, or you see anything
I think finances are the big thing. Because we touched upon that, how much we're, putting towards that right now. I think as you had mentioned, that the safer route is probably the draft one, or again, bring one in off the street after the draft. Because I think given he's going to be a backup, he's probably only going to get 10 to 12 carries. I think you can find value outside of signing, a Blunt who probably is going to cost more than Gillislee. I mean, who knows? I don't know what his value is, but there's a possibility that he may, just straight cost too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think now those are avenues we make phone calls on. Like maybe they're equal, or once again, maybe like Blunt would be a $2.5 million player. And at that point, does that open the door to saying he does offer us a more power back and a more situational type of guy? Do we go ahead and invest that $2 million that we saved? And now we just get the free pick for the difference between the two players. I mean, I think you can go that route as well. So I think the personnel department's already started to do this. I probably think they knew they were going to let him go 4 days ago. So I think they know exactly. Maybe they've already put in the calls into vet free agents, and the next thing that comes out tomorrow is Blunt's on a visit or whatever. I mean, so I think there's a lot of good stuff there, and I think it's a really good discussion, and it's a huge opening right now for us. So by huge, I mean like it's one that no one's talked about. So we've gotten the opportunity to get out in front of it and kind of express our feelings, and our listeners can get a really fresh view of this. And it's a totally new topic that beside whether to match them or not, now you can take it a step further and say, well, we didn't. So what does that mean for the team? And we could go many ways. We could say put and just say Jonathan Williams and Mike Tolbert. We could say absolutely not. We need a rookie running back in the 3rd round, or we could go the vet route and entertain Blunt or D'Angelo Williams or whatever. So
and back to Jonathan Williams, a lot of people that watched him in college had high grade on him, and he showed a decent gear at that level. And I know last year the complaint on him was that he was not as explosive. He didn't appear to be as explosive, especially since from college. But and so when I asked him about what he did to improve his game, because every offseason, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, players want to work on things to improve their game. And I asked him, straight up, what are you doing to improve your game? And he said, my speed, my explosiveness. And then that just hit home, because, that was the biggest critique on Jonathan Williams last year, is that he didn't, have the explosiveness that we'd like to see in a running back. And of course that is huge when it comes to a zone blocking scheme. So, you got to be able to explode once you make that cut. So, it's huge, and it's good to hear that he worked on that. So much so he went to Michael Johnson, the former Olympian, to work with his camp and to work on his explosiveness. And if you go on his Instagram account, you can see him working out. He worked out with Ty Montgomery. He was out there with Marquise as well. You see him on the treadmills, competing every day at this speed camp to work on that. So, I give all the credit to these players, because it's things that a lot of people, don't really notice or give players credit for, because he is trying to work to improve his game. I mean, he only had 27 attempts last year. How are you going to expect to get a guy like that who touched the ball a lot in college and was coming off an injury? How do you expect a guy like that get in rhythm? And that's the biggest thing I worry about Jonathan Williams, besides security issues, because he did fumble.
Yeah, I was going to say twice, right?
Yeah, and that was always a thing of his in college too. But yeah, to see him working on his explosiveness, and he's going to have to put up or shut up this year, because here's his opportunity. He sees it in front of him. He's put in the work. Now he's just got to produce in this new scheme that, of course, he's going to, he loves. And he'll have to do it on limited carry. So that's something to keep an eye on going into preseason, going into the regular season.
Yeah, no, Jonathan Williams is immediately in the spotlight. So I'm sure, we'll give out some great content on him, and we'll be able to talk about it more. And especially in the next week, to see if we do go the vet route, if not, or if we go the rookie route. We'll see which way we go in the next week or two. We'll absolutely know where Jonathan Williams, if he's just going to come in and be a number 3 competitor, or if he's going to come in and be the number 2 running back. So it will open the door for a lot of discussion. And yeah, it was a great conversation on running back. And as I just dropped, obviously on cover 1, I just dropped our big board and try to do things a little differently, because anyone can just release a BPA board that has, the same typical guys in order. So what I did was try to come up with a system where, it's kind of like a 1 to 30, 1 to 40 rankings. The lower the number, the higher that their draft pick's going to be. And I just tried to make it as simple as possible so someone could load it up and see what I think over here at cover 1. And as we reach now, we had a great conversation already a little bit on quarterback. We've talked about running back pretty in-depthly. One of my favorite positioning groups here is tight end. That, as you can see, OJ Howard's a solid 1, which is, you can't be higher than that in my rankings.
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much think he's a once every 5-year type of tight end. I think he brings a lot to the game, and he's like one of my favorite top 10 picks. So I don't know where you stand on OJ Howard.
Are you locking it in right now? I saw you put something on Twitter. Are you locking it in? Is at pick 10? He's your guy.
He's my guy if he's on the board. Yep. Absolutely.
I don't blame him, man. He really is one of the top 5, top 7 players overall in this draft. And when you consider scheme and what they're going to try to do to help Tyrod Taylor,
absolutely.
Absolutely, and try to help Tyrod Taylor, especially over the middle, and in the short to intermediate area, an area that he did struggle with between the numbers. So a guy like OJ Howard, I mean, goodness, the things you can do with him, paired with Clay, you can, both of those can stretch the field. Both of those guys can run down the seam, run away from people. He could open up at something I've talked about. He can open up underneath routes, him and Sammy, because you can line him up in the slot, offline and send him deep and have Clay work that short to intermediate area where he's at his best. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Clay was trying to do a lot of different things to make up for the fact that Sammy was out. He was trying to run routes he doesn't normally run. And he's at his best when he's in line, when he's, look at Charles Clay. It's talked about, but not enough. He's a top 5 blocking tight end. He really is. He opens huge holes in the running game. He's a really good pass blocker for a tight end. And what we could do is when you can put them both on the field in 12 personnel, and you can align them differently. You can put Clay in there and have him just stay in and block if you need him to. And you can really disguise different things that are going on within your schemes. It's just not a normal benefit that teams have to have 2 strong tight ends. And everyone's going back to the fact, well, we paid Clay, he's getting paid like $9 million now. Like similarly to running back, how can we just go and invest a first there? And it's just for this. I think
it's the same argument too, though, to the McCoy thing. You got to think long term. This guy is by, not Charles Clay, but OJ Howard is considered by many as, like you had mentioned, a 5 to 10 year guy that is a difference maker. So if you're thinking long term, especially past 2017, it makes sense to invest in a guy like Howard, considering the scheme, considering Clay's contract, and just honestly, when you get to 10, if he's the best player available, then you got to do that.
Yeah, once again, you might strike out a position or two, but generally, and if he's the best player by far, and he's a once in every 7-year tight end that you don't have a scouting grade on tight ends like this often, you take them, and you don't look back, because I think you lost 140 targets last year, right, between a couple of players that walked, and we could get that back from Philly Brown. We can get that back from Andre Holmes. We can get that back from Jeremy Butler, whatever. We can get that back from a 4th round or a 3rd round pick we take this year too. But I think to have like a rock solid guy that can eat 60 to 70 targets, that, you can run different routes with, that you can leave into block, that you can, now you have, my biggest thing for him is in 12 personnel, and you have him and Clay on the field at the same time, and you send them both out on a route. Do you have 2 linebackers that can cover 2 receiving tight ends? Because most teams don't. So you're getting those mismatches that you're not, when you get a receiver, he's on their number 2 cornerback. So that player could be really good. In this scheme, you might get their worst player on the field and their 3rd outside linebacker. Like their 3rd linebacker on the field could be covering one of our 2 dynamic tight ends. Like that equals mismatches galore to me.
I've talked about this several times, and I'm going to stand by it, because when you play against the Bills, teams have to scheme. As bad as people think Tyrod Taylor is a passer, they have to worry about his legs. And by doing that, you play zone defense. A lot of zone defense, a lot of cover 3, because you want that extra safety in the box to stop the run. So guess what? They're going to play a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 3 match. It's zone coverage that turns to man coverage. So when you have 2 guys like Clay and Howard on the field at the same time that can occupy, linebackers and safeties, it opens things down the seam. And then take into account Tyrod Taylor's inaccuracy at times. You have a guy in OJ Howard
who's as fast as a receiver, first of all.
Who's as fast as most of the receivers in this draft, and then has the wingspan.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think, and that's why he's being considered, one of the top players in this draft.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say if he's there, because I think there's now a chance he goes top 8. So I think that there's an opportunity to where, he's my pick if he's there. I would say unless someone really falls, I don't really have a competitor to where I would be more happy than I would be taking him at 10. So I think he, as you can see on and I noticed that when I was grading out my board, and I can say that even Njoku, who's 2.17, which is a great grade in my score, he's still a full point better. I mean, he's still better than Njoku, and you're getting, an additional point grade in my system by sitting at 10 and taking him rather than trading back. So if you evaluated that to not trading back and OJ Howard's on the board and you pick a 10 and you take OJ Howard, to me, you're getting that value of like 1.17 within my formula of a player by staying there. So is 1.17 worth the extra pick you gain by trading down and taking in Njoku? Those are the things you have to evaluate when you're calling teams and trying to make deals. So, I mean, I think with him on the board, and if he likes him as much as we like him as much as I like him, I don't even think you think about trading back at that point. If he's off the board, a couple other guys the safeties are gone, I think that immediately, like, you know what, I like Njoku. We've mentioned tight end a lot. We think that that's a good need. Let's trade back and see what happens. So I think you can do it at that point.
Right. I mean, those two guys in my book, Howard and Njoku, I have first-round grades on those guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do think it's going to be difficult. I would be surprised if Njoku falls to our second-round pick. But, I mean, this tight end class, you can't go wrong with any of these guys, honestly.
I like Evan Ingram, too. Beautiful. I mean, he doesn't do some of the things that, Howard and Njoku can do, but he would be the number one tight end in some years. So, like, what's really funny about him is he's booming up boards. I saw him go 20th overall last night in NFL Network live mock. Like, he's a guy that absolutely is a worth a late first round pick to me. So, I mean, I'm not saying I want him at 10. All I'm saying is that if for some reason he's there in the second or we trade back, like Evan Ingram's another, real name to watch for in those 20s. And I'm not kidding. Like there could be 3 tight ends go in some years when you have 0. So, I mean, in the top 25, I would not be shocked to see Evan Ingram slip up there. And then you have guys like, Jake Butt, who's good too. He just got hurt and, had some issues there, but he's another guy I wouldn't mind swinging the trigger on in the third round. I mean, I have Evan Ingram as, a late first round grade. So I personally have 3 first round graded tight ends. So
Ingram's nasty. He doesn't have the versatility as far as like the run blocking. I mean, he's willing to, and that to me is a good thing. He's willing to.
He's like Erik Ebron to me.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, he produced. I mean, he caught almost 71% of his catches. He had 926 yards last year and 8 touchdowns. I mean, over 3 years, he had 12 touchdowns. So, I mean, he's a guy that can put up, numbers. And last year he had over 400 yards after the catch. So, a lot of people even consider him almost like a big receiver, a guy that could play in the big, in the slot as a big receiver, big tight end.
Too, so
yeah, absolutely. He would fill several needs. And probably not obviously a guy that you wouldn't have to waste the 10th pick on, but a guy that there's a possibility he could be there in the second round.
He could be there in the second round, but he's absolutely a prime candidate to take in a trade back scenario. So if we do move down, Howard's off the board, don't like what's there, we take a deal. If someone comes up for a quarterback or whatever, we take a deal. Immediately, like Evan Ingram is one of the guys that I'm immediately probably pumping, like watch out for Evan Ingram in the 20s because, or whatever pick we trade back for, because he's immediately like probably a consideration the second we, turn in the card to trade back. He's immediately like a consideration for me to consider. And in the second round, like you mentioned, if we're going to sit there and wait and he's on the board, if he's sitting there and we didn't go offense in round 1, I absolutely am immediately like going off the hinge trying to make sure we take him. So
yeah, I mean, for tight ends, he was number 1 in yards per route at 2.59. He did have, a series of drops, but I mean, look at his deep pass receptions. That's what he brings,
that converts, man. And that converts in the NFL. Some of these deep pass yards. I mean, you got slot receptions, you got slot yards. Those things convert, especially slot receptions. I mean, some of those will convert in the NFL. So to me, I don't think it's far-fetched to see him. I don't think he'll be there at 44. So I don't think it's far-fetched to see him go in the 20s. So like he's a top, like I said, he could be a top 15 pick in other drafts because, everyone's looking for these tight ends. He gets a little overshadowed by guys like, that we've already mentioned, and Njoku and OJ Howard. Any other year he's being talked about like Ebron, like he could go between 9 and 15. I mean, so you can see that with my rankings, I have a late first on him. And if those 2 guys weren't there, I probably would have to even score him a little bit higher. But like you said, he's got some blocking issues, and that's part of the position. So, in
Yep.
schemes where he needs to block, probably like ours, that's a little bit of a concern. Like, I don't mean to talk him as a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
That's a concern. But we do have one of the best blocking tight ends once again. So you might be able to get away with spending the 25th overall pick. For some reason, we get that on Evan Ingram. I like him. I mean, I personally wouldn't have any hesitation with trading back, grabbing a second, getting into 21 and taking Evan Ingram. I really wouldn't see that as a bad move, especially if you diagnose him as a better pass catcher at some of the other guys in the draft at receiver. So
definitely. And that's the thing. A bunch of these tight ends they're bigger guys and they, offer more blocking, like Howard and whatnot. But they're as fast as these wide receivers in this class. That's what's so crazy about this tight end class and why they've been rated so high, especially compared to other years. So Ingram, when I think about him and the ways they could use him in this offense, it's chasing the Joneses, it's chasing the Patriots. How did Gronk, a good blocking tight end, and Hernandez survive in the same offense? And they had Gronk, as an inline tight end, and they moved Hernandez around. They motioned him around, and they had him working those, those seams in those short to intermediate areas. So, although he doesn't offer the blocking that, an O.J. Howard would, he's still a weapon, man, and he can do a lot when split out wide.
Yeah, and Njoku as well. I think who do they rank the best blocking tight end in the class? I would have to go back and look through some of my notes, but I believe Njoku actually brings. I'd have to confer or read some of my notes on him, but I believe he adds in a dynamic blocking system, doesn't he? Or is he more?
I never saw him. He to me, his style of play kind of reminds me of like a Vernon Davis. He's an athletic guy that's fast and can make people miss in the open field. I see him more as a receiving threat. But I have seen film of him actually, again, willing to block and whatnot. So I wouldn't ding him too much on that.
What about where do you think Howard ranks out just pure blocking? Let's say we only wanted him to block. How do you think
he's the best tight end in this class? There's no doubt about it when it comes to blocking.
Okay.
He's so physical. He's so big. When he engages those defensive ends and linebackers along the second level, he not only, has good hand placement with it, but he's able to, move his feet. He's able to target guys in the open field, which when you run a lot of counter trays or you run these split flow zones, you got to be able to target end man on the line of scrimmage or guys along the second level. He's got it all, man. There's a reason why he's considered. I mean, we keep coming back to him. That's how good he is.
A lot of people, bring up to me like, well, let's just have Nick O'Leary be a blocking tight end. Like, why do we need to upgrade our tight end 2 that heavily? To me, you're getting a tight end 1, and then you're getting an extremely good tight end 1, like a 10-year tight end 1, and then you're getting a tight end 1 that you already have in Charles Clay, and now you have 2 tight end 1s. Like, there's no other way to look at it. You can't look at – and then I'm not the biggest depth guy in the world. Like, you'll never hear me say, like, I think we need to draft Jonathan Allen because our defensive line can use depth. Like, I get the rationale there, but like, I'm a starters guy. So if I have 4 starters on my team, the last thing I need to do is be like, I could use a 5th guy in case someone gets hurt. Like, that's just not how I look at building a roster, right? So if you look at and if you look at O.J. Howard and, the speed he possesses and what he can do for your roster, he's huge. If something happened to Charles Clay, this is just a very side benefit. He's immediately right there as a tight end 1. You don't miss a beat. You'll miss a beat a little bit from Nick O'Leary to the Charles Clay.
Oh, it's a bigger drop.
Yeah. But
definitely.
But you'll have O.J. Howard that can take away a lot of that relief. So you do add that positioning depth to an important position on 12 personnel. And I'm not as big of a Nick O'Leary fan as like some Bills fans or experts. Like, I don't really think he does anything for me. And the other guy you have there is a converted quarterback. So, I mean, once again, you won't ever hear me like pump depth. But in this case, when you're getting the player and depth, a player that will play day 1, like, it's a no-brainer. You add too much. You add too many benefits to me to outweigh like the negatives, which to me is not taking another position. I think is the only negative, really. It's tight end. Like, does he win you a game? And in my opinion, I think he can. I think he can win you a game if his skills convert like I think they can. I think he can win you. I think he can win you football games.
And just kind of projecting to the NFL and the tendencies and where the league's going by putting former safeties in the box as linebackers. When you throw like OJ Howard out there, he's got the size to beat those safeties that are playing in the box, or to, whether it be on the ground or through the air. But he just creates so many mismatches, So, put him against a safety that is now a converted linebacker or that's in there in big nickel. I mean, good luck trying to guard him, honestly, with his catch radius, with his playmaking ability, like you're seeing here. Good luck trying to, to cover him. So
yeah, like we mentioned before, good luck using like a linebacker that wasn't expecting to cover him because we're not sure what we're doing in our 12 personnel. Good luck trying to cover him when you have to cover a Tyrod Taylor option run or a OJ Howard, like we see here, an OJ Howard sneak route where he just, kind of chips the defensive end and just peers out. Like, you don't know what's going on when you have a mobile quarterback. So good luck to this linebacker that's not Luke Kuechly. Good luck to him trying to figure this out, because I don't see Koamisi being able to handle that type of assignment because you still have Charles Clay, you still have Sammy Watkins, you still have other things going on to where they can't just look at OJ Howard too. And if you do, great. I'm glad Sammy Watkins is alone somewhere, or I'm glad Charles Clay's running down the seam against some backup safety or some free safety that they wanted to cover him with. Like I'm great with that. And that's we haven't even touched on the depth of tight end. Like, man, if you can't get Howard, let's just say he's off the board by 10, which is possible.
Right.
And I still think you need to try to see if you can address the position. And one of my favorite targets is Jordan Leggett from Clemson. I mean, I think at a third round value, he makes plays. I think he's a good tight end as well. So I think there's some guys in this draft that could be as the top of other draft class tight ends. So
no doubt.
I think you have a bunch of guys that don't even come out in normal years, let alone now you have them all in the same draft. So, Jordan Leggett's sitting there, very underrated, in my opinion, one of the most underrated prospects. I have him at a 7.67 value, and that's only because he's competing against, that's a mid-third round pick, and that's only because he's competing against 4 or 5 other guys, 6 other guys, and you just can't have that many tight ends there. But in pure value, getting him in the third round, I think you're getting a normal tight end one there. You might not be getting the guy Howard is, but you're getting a guy in the third round that could come in and start.
I know, one of the guys at Cover One, John, my buddy John, he's loved Leggett. Of course, we talked about Njoku and his, inability, or he's not really known to be a blocker, but and Ingram the same way. But Leggett, he's probably a tier below as far as blocking and willingness to block. He gets manhandled at the point of attack, but there's no doubt he's a threat in the passing game. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, he's an absolute threat, and that's why he's a third round pick though. So at the same time, once again in the first, now second round, if we didn't address the receiver position or a pass catcher position, I'm going to be the biggest Jordan Leggett fan after a second round pick you've ever seen, because I will want to leave the draft with him if we didn't address that position in the first or second round. So
again, back to big targets, man. 6'5", 260 pounds. Look at the arm length. Look at that wingspan. I mean, that's nuts.
In college too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He comes with the production. He's not just a potentials guy. He produced at the highest level. He produced in big games. He helped a lot of people say, I mean, he really was part of the reason, you have Watson as good as he was. So I to have a guy like that be your safety valve and just be so athletically gifted, it converts. Being that athletic, being that able to pluck a ball, being open, and that ability to run a route at tight end position, it converts. And that's why, to me, you're sitting there in the 75th overall pick. You didn't take OJ Howard yet. You didn't do anything. I mean, I think he's got to be an immediate conversation for a pick in the third round.
No doubt. And if you look at the screen, PFF, their advanced stats has him as far as slot yards go. I mean, he's second overall.
Yeah,
that's crazy. And receptions too. So we're talking this, the future of the NFL and how they're bringing these hybrids, these safeties down in the box. And okay, well, good luck matching up against a guy like this. Again, much like Howard, has the size, has the length, and that vertical speed to create production.
And look at that yak, man. I mean, the 339 yak. I mean, if you're looking at that, 1,400 career yards, 16 touchdowns. Those are things that you don't see from tight end ones in some draft classes. So to me, I will be all over him if we don't address the position in the first 2 rounds.
Throw this into the mix too is Whaley's love for ACC players.
Yep.
All right.
And that school specifically.
And that school. And guys, they wanted guys that were leaders or, played in big games. I think he's done that. You can check that box. So all this production, from that conference, from that school. There's so many reasons why you could see the Bills taking a look at a guy like this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and he's absolutely he's a guy I liked even before I overly liked Howard. I wanted to see a little bit of more production out of Howard this year, and I got it. But after last year, it was like my tight end one. So, as well as John, he's a player of mine. Have him firmly in the third round. I don't think he should fall further than that. I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in the early third, late second too. So, I mean, to me, all those guys are going to go. And eventually when you're looking at your draft board and you're like, well, I could take this offensive lineman, or I could get an immediate tight end that can add to my team. I think that's going to outweigh on draft boards as soon as the draft kicks off. So
that's what you love about the draft though, Kevin. That's what's so great about it, because you know what? We sat here and you locked in OJ as your first pick. But then anyone can make the case, okay, well, you got a deep draft. Why are you wasting it on 10? So, and there are just so many, that's why, we love this. That's why it's always great discussion. Sometimes it gets heated. You never know. But, that's what's great about, the draft. And there's so many different angles to it. And there's so many different, things to discuss in this tight end class. I mean, I don't think there's anything bad you could say about any of these guys that you put on your board.
Yeah, no, and I like most of them. And once again, these are going to be my highest ranked guys. So, and obviously these aren't just Bills prospects. So a lot of them will convert in other schemes. I didn't just make some years I make just a Bills centric one, but then I find myself roping into a corner where, I haven't sat down with Rick Dennison. I can't really say, exactly what he's looking for. So this year I went out and did as many, rankings as I can. And, is there a position that, really tickled your fancy, or a player, that we haven't been able to discuss yet?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the first round, I'm with you as far as overall draft philosophy. I think with the depth on the defensive side, that and where our needs align, I do think that going offense and getting that offensive value, whether it be OJ Howard or Corey Davis, any offensive player that I think will add to this the arsenal that we already have. I think that's a smart and logical way to go. So Howard definitely falls in that in the first round, and especially if we stay at 10. As far as second round, though, where are you on the second round? Because for me, if I'm going offense first round,
so
I think second round is start loading up.
Yeah. So if Howard comes home and he's a Bill, I'm immediately I'm zooming all the way down to defense, and I'm kind of seeing how that board looks.
Mm-hmm.
The problem there immediately might be at the linebacker position. A lot of those guys can be gone or should be gone. The guys that we, would consider day one starters to me. Defensive line, once again, isn't my top priority to get I love our front four. I love our starting four. There are guys that I like Carl Lawson. I like Charles Harris, but, these guys are probably going to reach up into the first. And I don't like the value there as you start to get down the board on the defensive end side of things. So I'm going to go down to immediately to outside linebacker, and I'm going to look at who do you consider to be gone at this point? So you would consider McKinley, Cunningham, Reddick? Who would you?
I personally think I'm really high on Reddick. I think he's worth it at 10. I know a lot of people will say, no, I want to trade back. No, we don't know if we can even do that with the value and depth in this draft, and the way when you graded these players. It's so tight. It's such a fine line that I don't worry about trading back. Is he good enough to take a 10? I believe Reddick is. I do think he would be off the board by our second pick for sure. And if I were to go defense in the first round, he would be the guy I'd be targeting, especially in this scheme.
Yep. And then we bring back up the receiver tight end conversation. And then, here, so let's consider him gone. So what are we looking at? At the linebacker position, we're looking at a TJ Watt. Is he gone?
I don't think he's a scheme fit for the Bills.
Okay, so you get rid of
I do think he's an end of the first round. I think he's an end of the first round talent, early second round talent.
I think he's gone anyways, personally, by our second pick. So let's consider him gone.
Mm-hmm.
And now you match that with maybe not being a scheme fit, and then boom, so you get rid of him. So to me, I'm not loving my value at the point, but I do like Duke Riley. I think he is a scheme fit, and I do like Tim Williams. So I'm not sure where you stand in either of those two guys.
Well, I mean, I scouted Riley heavily. I've watched a ton of his games, and to be honest, I think he's a McDermott guy. Rob Quinn, did a bunch of research on scheme fits and profiles of players that have played
Yep.
linebacker for McDermott, and
Yep.
Riley was one of those guys, as also Anzalone, who's also on the list you had. But I'm a big Riley fan. I think he's a leader. He was a captain there. He was looked up to by not just the coaches but the players. He has it all. He's very sound versus the run. He's got the ability in the pass game.
Do you have
to
him
cover
in second round? Like I have him in the third round grade. Do you think he's a mid second?
I do. I have a second round. I do have a second round grade on him.
Okay.
I know a lot of people have him projected in the third.
Yep.
I'm not one of them. I just think I see him very similar, maybe not as explosive, but as a comp to Deion Jones last year. I think he has that kind of athletic ability, and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, do you think he's a day one starter at the position?
If we're considering what McDermott said, saying that Alexander Ragland is the Mike, Preston Brown's a backup to the Mike, and Ramon Humber is playing outside weak backer. Sure. I do think
at least
Riley brings that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, because I think it's a joke. I think Humber plays like at this point. Let's say we don't add a linebacker. I think he plays at most 20% of snaps. So, so I think he would immediately take those snaps over. And I like Duke Riley. It just, to me, like when I watched him and graded him, I just saw even an early third, mid third from him. I think he's a great scheme fit. He didn't like do one thing that was like a wow factor to me to like want to invest a top 40 pick. Well, 44 in this case. But he's a scheme fit, and I wouldn't be upset to take him. And I can see exactly where we'd come from in absolutely knowing he has the measurables to what we're looking for. So I like him, love him in the third round. I don't know. To me, it just matters. A lot of people, it doesn't matter where they're like, well, if we like the guy, just take him at 44. To me, it's like, it's just so much sweeter to get him at 75, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Especially when I do have a third round grade on him. So that just like clicks to me that 75th overall, third round grade, those mirror up. And that's a perfect fit for me to reach on. To me, like I thought we did that with Preston Brown, where I had a later grade on him and we took him in the third. And it just like, I was okay with the player, but it just didn't mesh. I really thought we reached to get the guy that they thought fit. So it's like a similar example for me. Do you feel anything special on Tim Williams or Tice Bowser? Or
I don't like them that early. I think Bowser, when I watched him, I felt like Bowser was not a 4-3 guy. I see him as an outside linebacker that needs to grow into that 3-4 outside linebacker role because he is kind of undersized.
He'd be great with Rex.
No doubt. He would definitely be a Rex guy. He's athletic. As any outside linebacker in this draft, he's very fluid hips, can open and run. And cover that, hook the curl to flats area in his own scheme. But to me, just the way he plays, the way he moves, his lower body being thicker than most outside linebackers that are playing in the 4-3. I see his build as more of an outside linebacker. I
think he goes, like I have a second round grade on him. I think he rock solid goes to a 3-4 team in the second round. So with all that being said, lastly, at this position at least, what do you feel about Tim Williams? Do you think he's like really the last second round grade I have? How do you feel on him specifically?
I think with we'll start with the on the field stuff. I think with his abilities, his pass rush moves, his initial pass rush moves, and his counter moves, he's one of the better pass rushers in this class, and that immediately bumps you up. Now, when you throw into account the off the field issues that he's had, and that's partly why, the Bills have brought in some of these guys that have had off the field issues because they need to talk to him one-on-one. They need to figure out who this person really is. Yeah.
We did. Okay. That's what I thought. I was just making sure. Okay.
Yep. Okay. And so, they need to do that, the diligence on guys like that. But when we're talking pure pass rusher, I mean, he's one of the better guys in this class. Yeah.
It's nice. It's a nice player in the second round at that position. Like, I really like him. But you're right. I don't interview him. I don't get to shake their hands. I don't get to the $1 billion investigations we put on the draft and whole. Like, who knows how much money they spend investigating, like, behind the scenes, like calling these people's friends and like showing up at play. Like, I don't even want to know what happens behind closed doors. When we're trying to learn about someone's character. So we know exactly where we stand on him. However, if we deem him a fit and we deem him okay character-wise, I think that, to me, he would be a really good value in the second round, and he would bring you a couple of different elements to the team. So I mean, that's how
Right.
I feel on him.
I do like him. I don't like him in the second round. For me personally, I would rather go with, I know it's not popular opinion, but I like guys, a guy from Kansas State who I studied a lot, in Jordan Willis. And, he's just a guy that, he's not as explosive as Tim Williams, but he's a guy that, put up the production. And he can play both the run and the pass. And that's what I loved about him. His pass rush moves, I mean, besides.
Where do you think he plays in the 4-3? I mean, I have him at DN. Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right.
And he can play that strong defensive end. He can play that weak defensive end. And he's not explosive, but man, he has so many subtle movements with his hands that he's able to, stymie the initial, stance and kick slide from, tackles and counter him, man.
Yeah. No, he's a baller. I mean, I have him as a rock solid 3rd round pick. So like, I'm not far off. If they deem him, they're the ones that make the decision. So if they deem him with that 2nd round value, literally it's similar to Riley for me. If they deem him to be that fit and bring enough to the table at 44, I could get behind it because I have him as a rock solid 3rd round pick. So, it's that same effect. I don't know why I get hung up on it, but if I got him at 74, once again, I would think that's awesome. So it's, to me, making my values match up with the draft pick. So
right.
I
do like him a lot. He's probably one of my top 5 draft crushes. Just because of what he does technically, and he's just looked up to, again, by everybody. He felt like a McDermott guy when I was studying him.
Yeah.
He doesn't have that explosiveness, but most of the defensive ends in this scheme have never been that. They've been, power guys that can win with technique. Mike Waffle's going to love the guy like Jordan Willis. But also a guy that can win with technique, but also, has counter rush moves that are probably some of the most skilled in this draft. I mean, he has, 2-3 counter moves that he can pull out on any given play.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you have him ranked in the 2nd round, and the team at least likes him. I think we spent a lot of time with, lastly, at least at this position group, with Derek Rivers too. I mean, how do you feel about Derek Rivers from Youngstown? Like, for some reason, it just seems like he shot up boards and like went on tour to Derek Rivers. So,
right.
I think he's another guy that could fit this mold that we're talking about here. And, I have him a little lower down my board. Like, I have him as like a 3rd or 4th round pick, but, I wouldn't be shocked to see him, sneak up into the 2nd round.
No, I mean, honestly, I do think he'll go. I'd be surprised if he was on the board when we pick. Honestly, I think he's that good. Yeah. I know he played at Youngstown State, but when you take into account everything he's done and how he's dominated, I do think that he's someone that could slip into the 1st round. There was talks about that happening, just a few weeks ago. So I mean, if you look some of the comps and some of his numbers, I mean, a 4.6 for a defensive end.
A lot with Jordan Willis too, huh?
Yeah, exactly right. So I do like what he brings. He's got decent arm length, which I know McDermott loves that at every level of his defenders, whether it be corners, safeties, whatever.
Yep.
I do think he's got more explosiveness than Willis. But I think he's twitchier than Willis, because a lot of people ding Willis because he's not explosive, but I think it's almost also deceiving because he's a long strider. He's got a lower body that's thicker and bulkier than a Derek Rivers. So when he takes his stride, it looks slower.
Yeah, and that's what I noticed too. That's why he's in my 3rd round. But I mean, I can see where he excels though in those power rush, bull moves.
No doubt.
So I get it. I love them. Once again, I think they're both scheme fits. I think they're both, to me right now, I have them in the 3rd, but that's not to say the Bills don't see value in them at the 44th overall pick.
Right.
As we've exhausted outside linebacker, we don't see a ton there in the 2nd round. Defensive end, we see a couple potential picks there. I don't touch that in the 2nd round. Once again, at outside linebacker, we didn't really see, maybe beside Riley, we didn't really see anything. Inside linebacker, I don't really see, Davis is going to be gone. Foster's going to be gone most likely. McMillan or Walker do anything for you?
I love McMillan. I do like him.
I have a high grade on him, man. Yeah.
Very, very similar to Riley, but he's not the coverage guy that we need.
So he's going to be pure Mike, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I do like he's very sound with his technique, with his run fits. He's got very good eyes. Doesn't, he sticks to his keys. Got good, diagnose skills. But for us, no, I don't think that's a place to target.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have them both rated pretty high, McMillan and Walker, but I don't see them making the move there in the second round on either or. Then we go back to kind of the final position, at least for today, is defensive backs, and I think that's where it gets fun. I mean, we might have to pass on some of the guys we were just discussing to kind of pay to play in this position group.
Right.
And once again, as I've already kind of stated on publicly, like my cornerback rankings are a little bit lower only because there's so many of them and it's so hard to predict how they'll fall.
And the depth, yeah,
and the depth. Fact, I think that in this specific class, and that's how we're looking at it, right? And at least I am.
Yep.
It's hard to compete depth. So when you see guys this close in rankings, that tells me how deep it is, and that also tells me like you can get guys. Everyone can have a different guy rated higher on their board, so that's why I had to even it out. So obviously, Lattimore's going to be gone by our pick. It's almost a shoe-in, right?
I don't know. I would thought so? He's my number one, but I have seen again. It could be something. It could be nothing. I have seen people rate Conley higher than Lattimore.
Oh my gosh, I hope not. At least in my opinion.
I don't see it. I'm not even big on Conley altogether. I do have much like you. I have Humphrey above Conley as well. Yeah. And I have Quincy Wilson. I'm looking at your list. I see Quincy Wilson I have above Conley.
Yeah, wow. No, I like Quincy Wilson, but that's how, can you believe like most people's like top 7 are Florida and Ohio State? Isn't that?
Yeah, right.
That's kind of weird. But if you look at this and look what conference they're all from too, isn't that funny?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look at Humphrey, like how he's a pretty good scheme fit, right? I mean,
he's the epitome of scheme fit, if you ask me.
Isn't he more valuable to the Bills than he would be other teams?
Sure. I mean, a lot of people, again, they'll say, taking him at 10. I don't know about that. I would be comfortable with them taking him at 10 because he has it all. Is he a very good man corner? No, but he excels in press. He excels in zone, and he has that competitive fire, that competitive spirit that McDermott will love. He's not afraid to stick his nose in there and make a tackle, and we've seen it several times from him come up and lay a lick on a running back or on guys on jet sweeps and whatnot. So he's got that. He's a good tackler, and that's what McDermott has stressed this whole offseason, right?
Do you put any water in the fact that he likes working with like 3rd to 5th round defensive backs because you get like Kirk Coleman and
totally
the 2 guys last year? So do you see him saying, well, I like Humphrey, but this is such a deep, we don't want to spend 10 there. It might be, even if you think it's a good value, it might be a little bit high, especially considering the board and especially considering like players there. So,
and the depth of this draft too, because you're going to get guys in that 4th and 5th round that in zone schemes could possibly start for you. So it does hold water to a certain extent, but McDermott going into last year, they lost Norman and they went in last year. They drafted 3 corners. They drafted Bradbury in the 2nd. They drafted Darrell Worley from West Virginia. And then in the 5th, they took Zach Sanchez. And, to start the season, they had Ben Wickery as the corner opposite Bradbury. Okay. And he got toasted the first few games.
He got caught.
Yeah, and then they cut him and inserted Worley. And part of the reason why their defense struggled last year, not just because of Kuechly, but Worley struggled, and he was the 3rd round pick there, all right? The other guy, Zach Sanchez, I believe he was cut too. So as much as we say, and that holds water about taking DBs in the 5th round, but for me, I think if we're going to talk DBs going in the 5th round in McDermott's scheme, I think it would be more likely the safety position.
Yeah.
But in this draft, I mean, you're right. The depth of it is crazy.
Generally, I think that's a very good rule of thumb, but I think specifically this year too, I think you add that extra element of some of these guys being 4th and 5th round picks just out of pure numbers. So whereas, Sanchez might be a 7th this year, so, and Bradbury, I mean, he worked out reasonably well. I mean, he was a good player for a lot of the year.
He struggled early, but he came on the second half of last season, and he has the
but we're not
weight
talking about
measurables.
Start 3 of them either, so,
right?
We have some help there. I think really we only need to fill 1 spot, hopefully. So let's consider us not going cornerback in the 1st round. I think that's a safe assumption outside of maybe Humphrey, right? I consider that, and Lattimore obviously if he fell, but
yeah.
Do you see like Conley or White being a guy we would like take there? Because I don't.
Conley, he's been linked to us. I think he has the measurables, and I think his traits match up with what we want to do. I just don't think overall, when you put him side by side to Humphrey, I don't think he is as good a fit. And he's definitely not as good a tackler as Humphrey. Yeah. And again, if we're taking McDermott at his word, yeah, absolutely.
You're sitting there at 10. You have OJ Howard on the board potentially. Those are things you have to consider there. Like, let's say Humphrey's gone, or even if Humphrey and Conley are there, like, you got to consider, like, this guy's not as good of a tackler as Humphrey, so we have to, like, immediately scratch him out for the spot. And then, you take the best of that player and call Humphrey, and then you compare him to OJ Howard. And I still, obviously, I think Howard wins that battle. But let's say Lattimore, Humphrey, Conley are gone. Who else do you think goes in the first round? You think White and Jackson, or?
I do think Jackson is sneaking up and rising towards the end of the first round just because of his man coverage abilities. And, his workout, he worked out really well. He's a very fluid athlete. And if you need a mirror corner, he's your guy. He's purely a man corner that, is not afraid to come up and make a play versus the run or whatnot. But his calling card is, okay, that's your man, you guard him. Yeah. So I could see him sneaking up. I know a lot of people like White. I wasn't that big a fan of him. He didn't make it into my top 5. But I could see him somehow sneaking in there. Like I said, go ahead.
Going down the board, I was just going to say, then you must have Quincy Wilson sneaking up there, right?
Oh yeah, I have a first round grade on Quincy Wilson.
Yeah, I have a pretty decent second round grade. Like, how high do you have him? Like, how high?
He's my number 3. It's Lattimore, Humphrey, and then him.
And a late first grade, or like how?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I have like an early second on him. Do you?
Yeah, that's not much of a difference in this draft, right? I mean,
especially at this position group.
Yeah, exactly.
Him being available for our second round pick, or do you see him sneaking into a playoff team?
I could see him being there in the second round, just because, again, a lot of people like White. They do. They definitely do. And Conley is rated a lot higher than Wilson in most people's minds. So I could see him being there in the second round. Absolutely. It just, for our scheme, his ball skills, his ability to process route combos, whether it's 2 or 3-man route, he fits it. He knows how to do it. He knows how to bait quarterbacks, come off his man, continue drop and make a play on the ball. He's got very good zone eyes. Size, of course, is always there. Some of his weaknesses, Quincy Wilson's weaknesses are his press technique. And that will, could be a major factor of the Bills not looking at a guy like that, because they need guys that are effective with their hands near the line of scrimmage, whether they're playing man or they're playing zone. So, but yeah, I do have him a lot higher than most people.
Yeah. And, I like the player. If he was there in the second, I would have no problems taking him there. Would I want him at 10? No, but obviously they're at that second round spot where they were looking for a D-back. I would have no problems swinging the hammer to grab him. I mean, I think he'd be a day one starter. So,
no doubt.
He's one of at this position group, although I have most of them in the second round only because of each other. So, it's tough to really, I weigh depth a lot, and I weigh what you can get where a lot in my grades, because I think it matters. You're looking at it on a year-to-year basis, not just against Deion Sanders or something. I'm looking at it on a purely 2017 NFL draft rating against his peers and against the draft board. So, let's say we go D-back in the second, we took offense in the first. Where do you go? Who do you swing on after? With all that being said, at 44.
At 44,
corner, yeah.
If we went offense in the first, second round, I definitely think you have to go defense. And I do think, that the top tier corners in this draft I think there's a decent drop off, not a big drop off, but I think if you're talking from second to third round, I think you would have to go after a corner in the second round. A guy, obviously, that fits the profile of what McDermott wants to do in zone coverage. But so any of those corners that we talked about that has the size and can play zone, I'm cool with, honestly. Wilson, if he's there, he's my guy, obviously, because I have him rated quite high. So I would stick with that in the second round.
Yep. Yeah.
Where are you on that? Where are you in the second round?
I do. Once again, I also like Quincy Wilson there. I know Kevin King's shooting up boards too, man. Like, I have him a little lower than some people, but he's like Wilson is for you. I mean, I've seen him as high as like top 20. So he's an interesting player to me, especially with the injuries to Jones and, Moreau. Like, he's like really shot up. So
Right. And a lot of people have, I mean, I know there's an article that came out this week. I don't know if it was from Tony Pauline, but he, questioned a few franchises and compared their boards to each other. And
right.
Kevin King, I believe, was one of those players that, both franchises agreed on is a first-round talent.
Yeah, no, a lot of people are saying that, and I just saw someone just changed the rankings. I forget which major site. Someone put him like second cornerback.
Yeah. Well, he does have those skills, man. I like his film. I wouldn't say I loved it. I do like his film and what he brings. But with him, for me, it was more
6'3", 200, man. Like
yes. Okay. He's got everything.
Yeah.
He's got all those, he's got the measurables. He's got the speed. For me, it was, and you'll see him right here. I got him ranked right here as, an early second round talent. He's got the size. He's got the ball skills, very good range. He can play several coverages, having come from Washington. They played having the skill on that back end, at Washington. They played a lot of cover three, but they also played multiple coverages. So he's got that kind of scheme fit. I did see issues against inside releases. And he had, as receivers work back to the ball, he had issues, planting and getting forward on the ball. And that to me is a technique thing. And can he learn that? Yes. And that's why a lot of evaluators are saying he's got that upside. And if he falls to the second round, you take a guy like that at a premier position corner in a passing league with those measurables and a possible upside and potential.
Yeah,
why wouldn't you take him?
To me, he was just going to be the guy I was going to mention of wanting in the second round. I don't know if I'm far-fetched to think he'll now be in the top 20.
Not at all. He could go in the first round. There's no doubt about it, Kevin.
Yeah, so maybe I'll have to scratch him out. But if he's there, just like Quincy Wilson, either or, I'd be fine with. If they're both gone, which I guess is another possibility, I mean, maybe we have to look at safety or maybe linebacker again or something. But I like both of them. I think there's a chance one of them's there. So, it's pretty, maybe we like one of those other guys. Maybe someone falls randomly. Maybe no one wants Humphrey for some reason or Conley. I don't know. Like with all these guys, like they all can't go. So,
yeah.
So,
and, we talked about who we liked in the first round versus second round. And we kind of agreed, offense in the first. Okay, I think the value is there. I think the grade, when you look at an offensive player that could be there in the top 10, I think the grade is probably higher than our other need positions, whether it be outside linebacker or corner, except a few exceptions. But if we were to go defense in the first round, whether it be Humphrey or anyone else, I do second round. I mean, as you know, one of my other draft crushes is Zay Jones. I think he's just a perfect fit and a guy that should be there in the second. But I wouldn't be surprised if he also sneaked into the first. I just think when you look at him, just not from an overall standpoint as what he brings with his traits, I think he's just a great fit. Of course, a lot of Bills fans, they'll start with, his former coach is now on our staff. Okay, fine. Okay, put that aside. What, the other thing that he brings is, his ability to diagnose coverages and find those windows. And that's something that we need to add to this offense. We need guys that are reliable, have reliable hands, and he does, and that can find windows in zone coverage. And because we see a lot of zone coverage. We touched upon that earlier when we were talking about, O.J. Howard and these tight ends stretching the field and hitting those seams. I do think that Zay Jones in the second would be a solid pick, a guy that's going to be a solid number two with a year or two down the line, add some play strength to him, especially in his lower body, so he can beat press. I think he's a guy that could develop into a 1B behind Sammy Watkins.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, we didn't touch on, because we picked Howard, we didn't touch too much on receiver, obviously.
Yeah.
And, or I should say, I mean, mostly, I picked Howard. So, but Zay Jones, yeah, absolutely. Sitting there at 44, we have his, position coach. We shouldn't really know him. If we don't like him for some reason, well, we have the most insight of anyone, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Yep. He's quickly eliminated.
Yep. He's already, if we don't like him, he's quickly off our board. If for some reason his coach came in and said, I don't see him as an NFL talent, seriously, I had the inside look, he's already gone. But like you mentioned, maybe it's the opposite. And it's like, we need to make sure at 44, like there's no questions, we grab him. Let's say he's gone in another scenario. I also, I wouldn't be too mad at Smith-Schuster. I like the guy. I think he's an okay second round pick. And then obviously, Chris Godwin from Penn State's I think would be another great pick there too. So.
Yeah, those receivers, that cluster of receivers, whether it be Godwin, Zay Jones, Schuster, their grades are very close. Like everything else, their grades are very close for me. I think each of them brings, different things to a team. I've alluded to the fact that I think Juju Smith-Schuster is very similar to Robert Woods. I don't think he is probably as explosive, and his route running stylistically is not the same as Robert Woods. But he brings that same competitiveness, that willing to block. I mean, there are times where Schuster was in the box right off the tight end, and he was cracking back on linebackers. So that takes a special kind of receiver nowadays.
Yeah, he's 215. I mean, he has the weight there to help. He's not a small guy. I think by pure weight, by weight alone, I think he might be like one of the biggest receivers in the first 3 rounds. So
right.
So he does possess some of that there for him. He is a taller guy. He's only 6'1", I guess, but he does have a lot of that ability. And Cooper Kupp's another interesting option. I know some people are either like really like him or really hate him. So I'm more like okay with him. So, between him and then, you obviously have, our Darius Stewart and Curtis Samuel, there's a second round cluster there. And like you said, if we did go a different route than Howard in the first, like go defense, I mean, I think there are some solid options beyond just Zay Jones. If something happened where he's gone. I mean, I think most people relatively like Chris Godwin.
He's solid. I mean, he adds a little bit of everything in the run and pass game. And he does have some explosiveness to him. Now, when you talk about, I think Godwin is not necessarily a slot guy. You mentioned Cooper Kupp. There's Westbrook. There's Curtis Samuel. I think those guys are more slot, especially Kupp. He's purely a slot guy.
Yeah, he's a slot guy.
And to me, that's a system guy. And so he can. I like him a lot. Don't get me wrong. His technique, his route running, his ability to set up the defender and gain the leverage and where he wants to go on two-way routes is one of the best in this class, along with Ryan Switzer from North Carolina. I think those two guys are very similar. I do think Kupp is more reliable with his hands. But he produced in that conference, which he had to. You had to produce when you come from, Eastern Washington. So I do like him. I don't have a second or third round grade on him.
Yeah, I understand.
But they're effective players for what they do. If you need that guy, that role to be filled, I mean, you can't go wrong with him.
I have a rock solid third round grade on Kupp. I mean, I think he'll come in and be an immediate. He only plays one of the positions, like you said, but I think he immediately comes in and is a really good third receiver for someone. So
definitely.
I mean, I think that's good value, and that alone can be a third round pick if he can come in and catch 500 yards in the first year and kind of be right there for you. I think that's go for 50 targets. I mean, immediately he has value there, especially in the third. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him go into the fourth, but I do think with that cluster of guys, someone will like him enough in the third round to take him.
Right.
I mean, I'm okay with any of them. I do think we come out with a top 44 receiver. So especially like I'm almost 100%. If it's Howard's not the pick, they'll come out with one of these guys in the top 44. So they
kind of have to, yeah.
It's a useful conversation to say Zay Jones, Chris Godwin. I guess you could go Smith-Schuster and Kupp. Like one of them can be on our roster. Very, very likely one of them, especially if we don't do anything at 10.
I like the three that you mentioned: Smith-Schuster, Zay Jones, and who's the other guy you just mentioned? Godwin. I think those three guys are. If you're taking them in the second round, you got to be able to move those guys around. I think
you got to.
They got to be. At their ceiling has to be at the very least a 2. They got to be at least a second receiver on your squad.
Yeah, especially at 44. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And then I think the last name there that we didn't touch on, and a lot of people I see him as a rock solid number 2. I see him ranked as a solid number 2 receiver, but I don't personally like him. It's Curtis Samuel. Do you have any opinion on him? I see him as like top 50 everywhere.
For what they use him on, how they use him in that scheme, it was. I know Harvin, was a guy that was used at Florida in a very similar way. They used a lot of jet sweeps and out of the backfield as running back. Don't get me wrong. He is dangerous with the ball in his hand. And there are places like that, I wouldn't say necessarily in this offense. Would we like to add that to our offense? Yes. But will we? I don't know. As far as taking him at,
He just has a second round grade, pretty much, myself included, just everywhere. Like,
I know.
I don't know if we like him or not. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you if he's our style. It just I'm too split on him. But I do think he'll go in the second round. So
Really?
yeah, I do have a second round grade on him. I'm pretty sure he does some things well that will get him a second round pick, and I think he sets himself. I think he's like right there in the same cluster. So
I think he's another guy that offense has to be established. I don't think he's going to be, the premier receiver, obviously going in, second, third round, wherever he does go. But you're gonna find ways, much like John Ross, you're gonna find ways to get him on those jet sweeps.
Exactly.
To move the defense
so
horizontally.
People like
it
every
is.
coach ever wants their hands on that in case they hit. So
Absolutely.
the boom potential will always go on the higher end of their rankings. So, and he's one of those guys that I could see, like even like Devin Thomas went in the second. Like,
yeah.
And
you're talking Devin Smith?
Devin Smith, from the Jets.
Yeah, the Ohio State to the Jets.
Yeah. Devin Smith. Even he went in the second. I think Devin Thomas did too, but by the Redskins. You remember him?
Was he a defensive player though?
No, he was a receiver.
Devin.
He would have been. We're talking, man, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe.
No, dude, my memory's so bad. That one's over my head.
Not being good. So, anyways, moving on from him. Yeah, he did. Interesting. Wow, he's 30 already. Devin Thomas.
He's up there. But he was another fast, player. In the league. He ran in the 4.4s or something like that. I'm looking at her now.
Draft and
yep.
Him too. So him and more recently, Devin Smith from the Jets.
Right. Definitely.
Went in the second. So, kind of. I think the only thing we left on the table is safety. Like real briefly. I mean, you got your rock solid, top 10 picks there, and Adams and Hooker. If one of them falls, great. Like I'd love to consider them.
Of course.
Are you one of the guys that likes Adams at 10, or are you one of those that are like,
I'm really high on Jamal Adams.
Oh, okay.
Jamal Adams is my number one.
Okay, yeah, same here. I mean, I got him right above Hooker.
I'm not just talking at safety. I'm talking overall.
Oh, really?
I think, yes, I do. What he brings is not just athleticism. What he brings is, he sets the tone. He raises everyone else's game around him and expects them to play hard on every single play. He is a guy that if in Buffalo, I mean, just imagine the stadium after, one of his big hits.
I love him, man. Yeah, you don't have to tell me.
There's so much to like about him, right? I mean,
I think it's bizarre when people are like, well, he does everything good. Like, how is that a bad thing? Like he does everything good, but like he doesn't like get a lot of interceptions or blah blah blah. And I've seen people be like overthinking and be like, no, like I can see him in the 20s. Like, what are you talking about? You can see him in the 20s. Like,
he does have warts though, and taking a safety in the top 10, he does have warts. He does have flaws, and yet he does come in hot a little too often. And that goes, you got to pair that with, he is that tone setter. He is that Brian Dawkins type that is, trying to elevate his defense and trying to elevate everyone's game and trying to get the upper hand, not just with his play on the field, but in the minds of those guys coming across the middle and those in the mind of that running back that think he has a hole, and then Adams comes up to fill it and it's closed.
So with all that being said, you obviously take him at 10 if he falls.
Yeah. He's the guy.
Yeah.
He's the guy I would take if he's there at 10. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
I think he brings a lot more than just, an average fan would know.
So his warts, you don't think would hinder a top 10 pick?
No, not at all. Not for what he brings. No, definitely not.
We've already talked pretty in-depthly about Peppers. I mean, Hooker, I like him. I mean, I think he's a rock solid top 10 pick. I mean, I think he gets you the ball. I mean, he does some of the things you need your safeties to do. So I definitely see why he's going to go top 8. So
yeah, no doubt.
I take him at 10. I mean, that's on the record. I'm on the record I would take Adams or Hooker at 10 if either of them fell. Yep. I am on, obviously we already talked on this podcast. I like Peppers. Late first round grade, nothing more needs to be said. We already went into depth about him. What about, the kind of more those fringe first, early seconds in like Buda Baker and Melvin Liu? Do you have any opinions on either of those?
Absolutely. I mean, looking at your board, I would flip Baker. I'd put Baker where Peppers is.
Okay.
I have a first round grade on Baker. I think he could possibly be one of the top 20 players in this draft.
Really? Yeah.
And if his size as safety was a little bigger, I do think he would be considered in the first half of that first round. I think he's that good. He can do it all. I do think he plays a similar position like we talked about with Micah Hyde. I think that's where you want to see him. You want to see him as that fourth player in the slot. And he's just always around the ball. And he comes, even though he's a little guy, he comes so hard at it and brings it on every given play. And another guy that just, much like Adams, can elevate guys around him. Played in a very complex scheme at Washington with some really good talent around him. So he's very well versed in coverages. So I do think he's a better player than Peppers, hands down. Melifonwu, I think to be honest, I think he's been overhyped.
Yeah.
I think he's more of a
I got a solid
player.
mid-second round grade on him. So I think I have him about like, I know some people
That's
love
good.
him first. Like, I'm pretty comfortable on my grade on him. If we took him in the second, great. Like, I could see the positives there. I could see why they like him. But yeah, I mean, I don't touch him in the first round. But I think he's a player. I mean, I think he's deserving of some of the praise. But yeah, like you mentioned, I think he did rise shockingly fast. And especially when, you got your Adams and your Hooker and you got your Budda Baker and some people like Peppers. Like, I don't think Melifonwu really should be higher than top 50. Like, I really don't. I think he's a great second round pick for someone. I think he can come in and play good. That's what I got on him. Like, he's my fifth safety. So
I like Marcus Williams better than Melifonwu. I like Marcus May. Looking at your list, Marcus May, I like better than Obi.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah, if we're not talking, first to second rounders, I'm really high on Eddie Jackson. I am releasing a scouting report here the next day or so on him and just what he brings, because he's another guy, a captain at Alabama, and considering the talent and players that were in that scheme and on that defense.
Where do you like him? Like, what round?
I have a late second round grade on him, but from everything I read, he's probably gonna go in that third round range. And again, if a team were to take him in the second, I would not be surprised, because he just special teams. He had, I think, like 8 punt returns. In his career at Alabama. I mean, and last year before he got hurt, he had 11 punt returns for like 253 yards and 2 touchdowns just in the punt return game. So then you add that and his range back there as either a center fielder, as a 2-high safety, played in a complex scheme again and big games. He checks all those boxes.
Yep.
The only ward on him, really, 2 wards, injury history. Again, he broke his leg last year against Texas A&M, coincidentally on a punt return. And then second of all, his tackling. He's not known to be a tackler. Will he come down and from his 2-high safety spot and fill the alley? Yes. But he's going to come in high, and guys are going to break tackles, off of him. But
that's what I was just going to mention. That's what I noticed. I have a high fourth on him. I can see the why people like him. I could definitely see him in the third round. As he sneaks up to the second, I mean, someone's got to really like him at that point. But they would, obviously, if they're going to take him in the second. But yeah, no, I mean, if for me, if we're there at 74 once again or 75 once again, and we take him, I could see why. I have him in the early fourth, but definitely I'd probably see him going in the third. And to me, like, he's in that cluster to me with like Melifonwu and Sanders Williams, and like I know I think we brought in Marcus Sanders Williams, I believe, or at least we might have went to see him, but I think we really do like him. And lastly, another guy we didn't really touch on, Desmond King. He's like kind of small. Well, isn't he like 5'10"?
Yeah. 5'10", 5'11", yeah.
That combo nickel corner safety role that, I mean, man, that if they want that versatility.
He's it, yeah.
Pick right there for you, waiting to be picked if you like it. I mean, but I think he's too small for the scheme. But could be wrong. I mean, he definitely has a plus in the versatility category.
No doubt. Yeah, that's one of those buzzwords that we've been hearing.
Third round pick through and through, I think. And if 74, we're looking at him and, Eddie Jackson and Sanders Williams and, Marcus May. If it's all those are there in the third, well, good. I think there are some good players there. So
this is, and kind of going back to Eddie Jackson, and it's in my piece that's coming out. I just think if we're going to put Hyde in the slot and nickel, and Poyer is projected to be a starter as of right now. All right. So you bring a guy like Eddie Jackson.
Like a spot starter too.
Yeah. And you bring Eddie Jackson in, you put him deep in nickel. All right. So you got Hyde in the slot. You put Poyer and Jackson, as two deep. And then, what McDermott likes to do post-snap is rotate one of them down into the box, depending on the play call and whatnot. I just see Eddie Jackson able to do all of that. He knows complex coverages. And, again, like you rotate into a single high look, he's got the range and ball skills. I'm not going on a limb, Kevin. I will say that he has some of the best ball skills in this whole draft. And I'm including hooker and corners for that matter. He's that good. If he didn't get injured, he would be in conversation with Adams and Hooker in that first round, whether it be, top 15 or whatever. But I think he would probably be in the second half of the first. But he would be considered one of the top safeties in this draft if he hadn't gotten hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. The ball skills are something to really enjoy.
Oh, my goodness.
So I could see that, especially with that plan you mentioned, dropping Hyde into the slot. Keeping Poyer, keeping him around the box, and keeping him, watching that style of things, and then putting Jackson in center field. I could definitely see it there. I could see that happening. So,
no doubt.
And once again, this is another position group we've mentioned at like receiver and tight end. Like I could see definitely them coming out with one of these guys we've mentioned. I don't even think it's that far fetched to say from Eddie Jackson all the way up to even Jamal Adams. I don't think it's far fetched to say one of these guys that we can see here are going to be a Buffalo Bill. I don't think it's that far-fetched. Do you?
No. And, we talked about it earlier, acquiring those fifth-round picks, and that's the sweet spot for McDermott. He's taken safeties in the fifth round, and yes, he had to develop them. They didn't necessarily start right off the bat, but he develops those guys in the mid-rounds, fifth round or whatnot. And, the fact that we have, a few of those picks, you can see guys going in that fifth round. You talked about, Eddie Jackson. I don't think he'd be on the board, but a guy like Tedrick Thompson, if he makes it to the fifth, as bad as his tackling skills are, that guy is a center fielder.
Yeah, no, he is. He's definitely a guy, and that's what I was just going to mention. Any fifth round guys stick out to you? I like Lorenzo Jerome, but is there anyone that you like?
I do. Like I mentioned it. Thompson, I think, is a prime candidate. Even with his warts, I mean, you got to keep it in perspective. This is the fifth round. All right, so we're not necessarily looking for a starter, but Thompson has that potential to start for us, at least because of our secondary right now early. Maybe not the first few games, but he could have a chance to start. And getting a guy like that in the fifth round, I mean, you can't. That's value.
Jerome, like Harvey Clemens too, right?
Oh, I like him. I do. I don't think he'll be there in the fifth round.
You don't? You think he'll go earlier? Yeah, I have him as a fifth round grade, but yeah, I like him. I
think he's, in that, fourth round range. Obviously we don't have that pick right now, but
I think come up and get him though.
You never know, man. He's a guy that I project, if he were to be drafted by the Bills, I do think he's a guy that could come down and play linebacker. He's a guy that played linebacker throughout all of high school. He's one of the top 2 or 3 tacklers from safety in this draft. He wraps up. He uses his length. He's like 6'3" and change, almost 6'4".
He's a big guy.
Really long arms, and he just wraps guys up. Now, is he the best in coverage? No, but you put that guy in the box as a linebacker, and you need him to cover, to hook the curl, or even a tight end. He can do it. I think he's one of those guys when you're talking about sub packages. Whether it be big nickel or even 3 safety looks, he's a guy that can come down and play on passing downs in the box. So and someone that this staff could develop into a Shaq Thompson type role. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Lastly, I'll take one thing from McDermott, and I do think he tries to at least emulate some type of Shaq Thompson role, and we will come out with a player like that. So he would absolutely fit the mold there. And like you mentioned, we might have to come up. If he's a 4th round pick, we might have to do something to get that pick. So, especially if that's the role they have for him. So
definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think we gave a real good in-depth view and listen for our listeners. I know it's only going to be probably our only Cover One podcast, leading up to the draft and it being Monday. Hopefully people download this, listen to it. support, all the great stuff we have coming out. I have my big board that just launched a couple hours ago. You have plenty of new scouting reports coming out, just like you mentioned, for Eddie Jackson.
I'll have scouting reports up until the draft, and I may even just drop one on the draft because I feel like I didn't get enough guys in, honestly, with how things fell this year. But I'm excited, man. I'm excited about this draft, especially when you line up the needs on this Bills defense and even offense for that matter. I think they align really well with the depth of this draft. And we covered it a ton in this podcast. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm excited for Thursday.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Obviously, follow all of us on Twitter. You probably know where to find us. And, we're going to be live or be active. I'm sure you'll have all of our opinions, all of our writers, all of our contributors. Everyone will be very active in this one. It's a big time of year. If there's any questions or, shoot them our way on Twitter. And obviously, check out our Sabres podcast, where those guys are great. And thanks for tuning in.